Well, the wood warblers are small, insectivorous, mostly very active little birds, and a lot of them are arboreal, up in trees and high up in trees, but there's they're wide range of tree species that they feed in, and in migration they can turn up just about anywhere. And there's desert ones that occur in the deserts. There's one they fill about every niche there is in North America to find the insects that they prefer when they come back for nesting. So we're going to cover quite a few birds. Why are they, one of the reasons why they're so confusing to a lot of people, we're going to talk about that too, because not all of them have the name warbler in their name. So whenever we're out on a bird hike and I say, oh, there's a Louisiana water thrush, and people go, oh, what thrush? And I said, it is a warbler. And they go, what? It's not in the name. So we're going to talk about some of that and the reason they're really confusing, but just an absolutely beautiful group of birds. And I hope you're going to enjoy the program. All right. So like I said, I did this program years ago I couldn't do every bird, every warbler. There's like 38 in the eastern part of the United States, and I've got 30 in this program. So how I arranged this program was by how timing of how they arrive. So that's my my logic in doing this the way I did it. So my name for the bird is up at top, and the real name for the bird is underneath. And I call him the early warbler, the wax myrtle, which we call it their name for in the southeastern United States. These birds can digest wax, and so they can actually survive off of berries and colder temperatures where a lot of these birds cannot. Like I said, most of these birds are insectivorous. So the other Magnolia is the other one with the yellow rump. But this bird, they have a western counterpart. This is the yellow-rumped warbler. Yes, we called them butterbutts in college too. For those of you who are going to tell me that, because yes, it's a hard name to resist calling them that for sure. So the yellow-rump are the first to arrive. We even sometimes have them on Christmas bird counts here, but especially in the southeastern U.S. They're really common down there in the winter months. A lot of you guys have them at your bird feeders in winter, which is really cool. I've never had one at my bird feeder, but that's great. And they'll eat sunflower chips and hulla seeds, but also mealworms if you put those out. So and the bird on the right is a winter plumage bird. So what they look like in the winter, and we're now seeing they're transitioning into the breeding plumage, which is the bird on the left. Gorgeous birds, hop around, very active. We usually see them in groups here in migration. That's how they migrate, but they're going to nest way north. So yes, that rump patch is a dead sign that you've got a yellow-rumped warbler, and especially with just the little wing patches underneath. That is one of the easier warblers to cut your teeth on and start to learn. So the yellow-rumped warbler. I call it, and now this is the one I gave an example of that doesn't have the name warbler in it. This is a Louisiana water thrush, but it is a warbler. It's a member of the New World Warbler group. I call it the bobbing water bird. They walk along on the rocks, and then they love streams, and they don't dive under the water. They may dip down to get a bug or something, but the dipper is the only bird that does that completely under the water, walks on the bottom and comes back up. This guy walks along with a herky-jerky bobbing fashion, which is really, really cool. They are one of the earliest arrivers. They start singing typically in March here, in early March. They have a loud song. And my theory is, the water birds tend to have louder songs because their voice has to carry over the bubbling water sound and the waterfall kind of sounds. So they have very loud songs when they blast them. And it's so fun when we go on our spring bird hikes when they're singing. I usually say, okay, I'll buy somebody a biscuit, the first biscuit who spots it, spots it first, because they are not very colorful. Most of these birds we're going to see are colorful. This guy blends in, but when he's in the creek bed and he's walking along and he's bobbing up and down, they're easy to see. But when they sit up in a tree, and especially in the spring when there's no leaves on the trees, and he sings and sings and sings, they're amazingly hard to find because they're the color of a limb, of course. So the plain warbler, this is come in just shortly kind of after the yellow rumps, are the orange crowned warbler. And everybody looks at that bird and goes, there's no orange crown on it. And it visibly, and I've only seen the orange crown on an orange crown warbler once in the wild, and it was upside down. And I don't know if the wind blew it, but I actually could see the yellow spot on the top of his head. But they're very, very plain birds. And that's probably one of the most descriptive things about it, is it does have this dull orange gray look to it. And they have a faint eyeline. The bird that most people confuse it with are Tennessee warblers. And I remember bird banding one year. I always tell the story of Ruth in there, as she came up to me, and they had caught one in the nets. And when I got there, she said, "Okay, you got to identify it." They got the bird. I said, "Okay, we think we know what it is." And she said, "Tennessee warbler." And I looked at the bird, and I took my finger and I rubbed the feathers on top of his head back, and it popped the orange color popped open. I'm like, oh, okay, the orange crown warbler. So these birds feeding notoriously hang upside down, which is pretty cool. You learn these little things that help you when you're bird watching. Those little things that, oh, that guy's hanging upside down. Look at it, really plain, so that it leads you to them. So, and then one of the very first bird songs I ever learned. This is and there's different ways to pronounce things, and this is one that the way I learned it, and what most people say. So I call it the sycamore warbler because yes, in the springtime, they are really strongly in sycamores, high up in sycamore trees. But they do. Like the one on the left is at my friend Lisa Owens' house. It comes every spring to this hummingbird feeder that have the bee guards popped out of it. And this northern Paurula is drinking the sugar water from the hummingbird feeder. So it can happen. The one in the middle is in some Vinca plants that are on a friend's front porch. And it was bouncing around, and she took some pictures and sent it to me. But the one on the right is how you usually see them. Up in the tree, you see them from underneath, and you see that necklace. That necklace is actually red and blue together. It's actually very cool. And they have the broken eye ring, beautiful color of blue, and the yellow. But remember, in these birds, these are a dangerous group of birds for people who rely heavily on field guides, because they will look a picture up of a northern Paurula, and boy, they can be so highly varied. Look at the difference in the chest band in the middle bird versus the one on the top. So just know you have to look at those key features when you're identifying birds: the broken eye ring and the white in the wing, and then they know that the yellow's there and the necklace, but that necklace is not always so bold. So northern Paurula is how I was taught to say it. Most people say Paurula, and that is perfectly okay, but the name warbler is not in there. So and the cover bird tonight, the black and white warbler, I call it the nuthatch warbler. The guy, they do act like nuthatches. They cling to the sides of the tree, just like both of these pictures show, and they go up the tree and down the tree and around the tree. And one of the most surprising things I learned about this bird several years back is that it actually is a ground nesting bird, and a bird that acts like a nuthatch is up in the trees. You don't expect that to be a ground nesting bird, but it does act like a nuthatch, and they are striking birds. There's a good breeding male on the right, and then the females will be less boldly patterned. And I think the one on the left is probably a female. I think the one on the left was actually taken at spring migration in Texas many years ago. And then the really yellow warbler. When we're out bird watching and people were looking, and people said, "Oh, there's a yellow bird up there." And I think in LA, well, a lot of warblers have yellow on them, but this is the true yellow warbler. That's its name, and they're beautiful, all over yellow. But this chestnut red stripes. And on the front and on the back, and some birds, it's highly variable, but they're stunningly beautiful birds, and they love willows. We see them quite often around ponds and things like that. In migration, they're one of the most common birds in people's backyards. They used to come to my water feature at the old house every day for a while in spring. I know Ruth gets them pretty commonly at her water feature as well. They are absolutely beautiful birds, the yellow warbler. And the miniature oriole, I call it, the American redstart, very, very common bird. in the right habitat. And I mean, and truly what I'm talking about, these warblers, I'm almost always talking about in the right habitat. That's how common they can be. But in migration, they can turn up anywhere. They can show up. I know one year we had one in the little tree right out front of in the store parking lot. We had a warbler. Now I don't even remember which one it was. But they, like I said, in migration they can turn up. We had a common yellowthroat, which you're going to see in a minute, hit a window a couple stores down from us. So they'll in migration you can find them anywhere. But the American Redstart is a beautiful bird of typically oak woodlands. Beautiful songs, varied songs. And I was very surprised, and I'll put this out to my birder photographers, I didn't have a picture of a young or a female American Redstart. Everywhere this guy's bright orange, it would be yellow. And and I thought for sure I had a picture, and when I was doing this, I couldn't find one. So anybody wants to send me one, I'll put that out there for sure. And one of my favorite warblers, again, one of those click birds or inspiration birds, like we were talking about earlier, Bill, the Prothonotary Warbler. Roger Tory Peters said it should have been named the Golden Swamp Warbler. Like I said, I've heard them called many things: swamp canaries, swamp candles. They are cavity nesters, and we talked about in our nest box program a couple weeks ago. This is one checking out a hollow in a tree in the swamp, and they are stunningly beautiful. One of their favorite hunting techniques is they hover in front of a spider web, because there's lots of spider webs over swampy water, and they steal bugs out of spider webs. You'll see them hovering, and you'd watch them. They'll go up and they'll pluck a fly out of a spider web and fly off with them. So really great, beautiful birds. The Prothonotary, I guess, is a yellow color. Somewhere in the Catholic Church, I think it is, as how I was taught, that there's a rank or a position, and that's where that color comes from. I do like Golden Swamp Warbler better. Oh, this is Elvis. Yes, the Kentucky Warbler, and we call him Elvis because of the sideburns. Beautiful, very low in vegetation bird. They are down on the forest floor, up into the low shrubs, feeding. And they belt their songs out, and they can be very, very secretive. It can be hard to get them up to where you see them in the open, but when you do, this incredible bright yellow bird with the sideburns, and then it's hard not to make the Elvis voice, Kentucky Warbler. But that's we're nerds. Birds are nerds. So this is the Kentucky Warbler, again, a low vegetation warbler. Oh, the little masked bandit, the common yellowthroat, another bird that does not have the name warbler in it, but it is truly a warbler. And they are this. I know the picture. Were both of these taken in your yard? I think, Ruth, it's your water feature. I always call them the masked bandit, and you can see why. And again, all these pictures I'm giving you, I want to make sure you're talking about. These are breeding spring adults. Now, there's a whole different program for fall warblers. Peterson called them in his field guide confusing fall warblers, because it can be quite confusing when they're young plumage or transitioning. So these are nice breeding males on most of these. And they, as their names, or like I said, water features, they love cattails and swampy water and wet. And, we've had them a lot on our breeding bird surveys in wet prairies. So not where there's standing water, but it's very wet, low areas, and the vegetation there, the common yellowthroats. And they say, Wichita. It is a beautiful, beautiful bird, like most of these are. And the bird that I consider a true ground warbler, we had the Kentucky Warbler, which is a low bird. We had, and actually common yellowthroats are very low in their wet vegetation. But to me, this is the ground warbler. This is an oven bird. Again, no name warbler in it, but it is a warbler. And it has that orange central cap there, brown, very camouflage, and it walks along a lot on the forest floor. And so a lot of times they can be very hard to see. If you're brown and you're on the forest floor, that gets to be hard. You have to see it moving. They're very, very vocal, though. They have a loud, increasing teacher. And that way, and they sound a lot like a Kentucky Warbler. So you have to study those to separate those out. The Kentucky Warbler doesn't rise in inflection. The ovenbird does. Beautiful bird. Very common in Florida in the winter down there. I've seen them several times, and even the lower Rio Grande Valley area in the winter as well. Oh, one of the most beautiful warblers there are, and I'm sorry that I don't have a really great crisp picture of one, but the cerulean, of course, which it makes you know it's blue. I call it the maple syrup bird, and the reason I do that is because these birds have been declining rapidly over the last many years, and some of the new studies coming out in Missouri and the Ozarks. Hopefully they're doing better than we thought a few years ago, but I learned several years ago that they like maple forest. So I say, if you want to save the Cerulean Warbler, drink maple syrup, because the older maple trees that produce maple syrup are strongholds for the Cerulean Warbler. They're absolutely beautiful. They have this beautiful necklace, and again, we have little pockets in Missouri of them nesting here, but much further north, it is where they mostly nest. But the Cerulean is stunning. All right. Again, I love this bird. The worm-eating warbler. Okay, every one of these birds eat worms, but this guy got the name worm-eating warbler somehow. They can be hard to see because they do like very steep slope hillsides a lot. And not a lot of people bird watch on the steep hillsides, but we were lucky to get this bird at an area up at Weston Bend State Park, and it was sitting out on a branch, just like you see right there, on a steep hillside, but close enough to where we were up on the trail that we could see down on him. You can see on the back of him, and they do have that uniquely striped head. And again, the key to finding these birds is learning their song. So we'll do a whole program on that. So, how about this bird for a stunner? This is a hooded warbler, and you can see where that name comes from, because we associate the hood being black. Well, this is definitely a hooded warbler. And the reason I call it the cat call warbler is when I had to learn bird songs in college, that's how I remember this one, because at the end of its call, it typically ends with a so they have very varied calls and strong dialects from place to place. But I remember the ones in Pennsylvania didn't sound like the ones in North Carolina that I had learned. But typically that a cat call at the end, and they can be very secretive. I've seen them, deep in vegetation and not wanting to peek. We were very lucky that a few years we had them nesting at Weston Bend State Park, where we bird watch in the spring a lot. And they had like 4 or 5. They were up on territory, and they lasted up there for about 3 or 4 years. Very dependable. Very, you can see them jump out in the open. Now they're gone. Haven't heard them now for the last several years. And unfortunately, some of the slightest habitat change we can lose these birds. Worm-eating warbler is another one. They, parks, they used to nest, and we used to be able to go find them every year. Well, they come in and they clear out some trees, and so that people can see the vista in the distance. Well, they took out where those birds were nesting, and of course that chases them off. So these birds face this every day, and returning to areas where they don't have habitat anymore. So the hooded warbler. And this is the one earlier, the second bird I showed was the orange-crowned warbler, and I called it the plain bird. Well, the one you can confuse it with, the one that Ruth was talking about that day, is this bird, the Tennessee warbler. And yes, they do show up at oriole feeders now and again, especially on the citrus, or people have them eating fine sunflower chips. You guys down in Texas, especially the East Coast, I know down in Florida, I get them eating on bird feeders down there. And I call it the ticky warbler because that's truly its call. Ticka, 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 ticka. It's very, very ticky and quick. And, they're actually very common in migration. No, they don't occur overly in Tennessee, but that's when you have named birds after places, that's what you're going to get asked a lot. Oh, they must be all over Tennessee. Well, not really. They pass through Tennessee, but they don't occur there more than about any other state. Now they nest up north, mostly in the boreal forest, so much further north for their nesting. And this is the Nashville Warbler. So the Nashville Warbler must nest in Nashville, right? Now, the Nashville Warbler, I call him Mr. Eye-Ring. It's one of whenever you see them up in the tree and you put your glasses on, one of the things that will pop out at you is this bold white eye ring. The yellow, it has a gray hood, little red spot on top, but the yellow runs up from the belly, up under the throat, all the way to the bill. So it doesn't have a complete gray hood like a couple of birds we're going to see here in a minute. But and this guy is up high in the trees usually, versus the other two hooded ones which are very low into the ground. But the Nashville warblers are very common here in migration, especially in fall migration. We see a lot of them. But the Nashville warbler sounds. It has a hybrid. It is not completely ticky, but it ends ticky. So it starts kind of whistly and then ends with the tick. So you can tell the songs are close to the Tennessee warbler. So Nashville and Tennessee, it can be confusing, but they're pretty common Eastern warbler as they move through here. So they're one to be looking for. Just about anywhere. And this is a bird that really occurs a lot in Florida and winter and some of the southern states. This is a palm warbler, and they bob their tails. They bob along, and they'll pump their tail regular. And there's two distinct races. There's the eastern race on the right and the western race on the left. The western race is more white, not as much yellow under the belly, whereas the yellow in the throat and yellow in the under tail coverts. But the eastern race has this more yellow overall look underneath. But they both have that rufous cap. And again, their action. This is a bird that their action alerts you to the identification by pumping their tails as they're walking along on the ground. And they do spend a lot of time on the ground. I remember birding in Florida in winter years ago and finding like 25 of them around a water in a cow pasture. It was just a little pond, kind of a dried up pond. And I look out there and all this bobbing going around, and it's these palm warblers around this little water pool. So like a bird that action can actually identify it for you. This is a bird that is very common out east in migration, and we get them in here in this through the heart of the country too. It's called a black-throated green warbler, and then this is a female on the right and a male on the left. Not all of them, not all warblers are sexually dimorphic, but several of them are. The black-throated green, and again, to me, it just jumps out at me because of his call. It's very distinct, buzzy, zo-zee, zo-zo-zee, zo-zee, zo-zo-zee, and you pick up that call, and you can't mistake it. There's the other bird that sounds a bit like it is the black-throated blue warbler, which I don't have in the program, sorry, but it's just zo-zee, whereas this one's zo-zee, zo-zo-zee. So, again, learning the songs is really important, but they're just stunning birds. Oh, one of the most beautiful warblers of spring to me, the Magnolia Warbler. I call it the black and gold warbler. Beautiful, brilliant yellow, and just like how striking the black is on that chest. That's the other one that actually does have a yellow rump as well, like from the yellow rump we saw first. But you can't mistake this, not with this brilliant yellow underneath, up through the throat, and then the black stripes on the chest. Magnolias are very active little birds, and they're, to me, it's one of my prize warblers of the spring when I get to see them.
What part of the country for that one?
They nest north. They nest up in most of the north of the region. They migrate from the tropics through the heart of the country, through the eastern part of the country, up into their nesting grounds, up in mainly the boreal forest is where you find a lot of them. And you notice I'm saying boreal forest on a lot of these. Well, these birds, remember, they time their migration so that when they get to their breeding grounds, they're timing it so that their favorite insects, and they can be very specific to spruce budworms or white spruce bud or hemlock or insect things associated with hemlock trees, things like that. And we call it partitioning of the resource. And so in one big spruce tree, you can have these Magnolia warblers feeding at in the middle elevations, and you can have the yellow-rumps feeding higher, and the Cape May warblers feeding. So they partition out. Some feed near the trunk, some feed out toward the end, but they share that resource, and so they're taking advantage of the specific bugs, even within a tree, that they know will help feed their babies. And in years that when certain of those type caterpillars and stuff hatch, and big numbers, boy, they're feeding those babies, and you got high survivorship and everything. Some years, the drought years and things like that their hatch is suppressed, you can be hard on them. But absolutely stunning bird. I hope to see they're in that middle wave of warblers, I call it. We had those early warblers we talked about, and now we're into that middle wave that come through. They start, early wave is now, the middle wave's coming through in the next 2 weeks. We peak migration in Kansas City about May 10th. And so that's about peak for there still being some of the early warblers here, and the middle wave is coming in, and you might get some of these late warblers at the end of that. But when people try to do big days, I get a lot of people who try to see 20 warblers in species in a day. Well, they pick that peak around here around May 10th. They go out and try to see as many warbler species as they can in a day. Okay. One of my favorite warblers of all, and like Bill said, it was his inspiration bird. The Blackburnian Warbler, I call him the old fire throat. That yellow-orange on that throat is so hard to capture in painting and capture, even unless the lighting's perfect on it. To see that in the field, it just, to me, it's almost a knee buckler. I love Blackburnian warblers. There's a couple of birds, I've always in my life, I always said it isn't spring migration until I've seen a Blackburnian warbler and a scarlet tanager, two of the most beautiful birds in the world to me. These guys, unfortunately, I said that Bill and I saw those on the side of the road. Typically they're high up in oak trees, and so usually you're getting to look at this bird from underneath, and they're high. With age, my high pitch range is not nearly as good, and it never was great. But the last part of their song is so high pitched that most people cannot hear it. It just goes away. It's a 3-part song, and that last part, unless you have really good ears like Ruth, then you can hear it. But most people just hear the first part of it, and sometimes think it's something else. But they're stunning birds, and you're great if you see them with the leaf out isn't far along, so you can see them better. If there's heavy leaf out early, it's really hard to find these birds up in those thick leaves and trees. But you just got to be patient and watch for movement and get your binoculars on them. Remember, one of the first things I tell my groups when we're out bird watching in the spring is warblers sit still long enough to say, "Hey, isn't that oh crap?" And that is basically it. They're moved on to the next limb. And Ellie has told me that I don't do nearly a good enough job promoting binoculars, that I need to tell you people how important binoculars are to enjoying bird watching, in your backyard. But when it comes to warblers, I'm telling you, it enhances the experience so much. And we'll put a link in the binocular programs, but remember, 8 power binoculars give you a wider field of view versus 10s, which are much narrower. So 8s are great with active birds like warblers to be able to find them. If they chopped over a little bit, you still have them in your field of view. Whereas 10s, they move over a bit and you've lost them. Now, that's Ellie. I did my due diligence on binoculars. So the reason I have the male and female here is one, yes, sexual dimorphism, but the female Blackburnian on the right looks so different than the male that for many, many years, this bird was considered its own species. They actually thought it was, and they named it a hemlock warbler. So we had the Blackburnian and hemlock warbler. Only thing is, the hemlock warbler was a female Blackburnian, and it took a while to figure that out in the ornithological community. So that's the reason what a prime example of sexual dimorphism there, and fooling people for a long time. All right. Oh, the little black chapeau, the black-crowned warbler, the black-capped. The Wilson's warbler is a little bird, all yellow, but that black cap on top of the head, very active, low vegetation. You guys out west, if you're in Colorado, I've never been anywhere I've seen more Wilson's warblers than in the bushes along mountain streams. They love that habitat. Orange crown warblers and Wilson's warbler just really common out there. So, but here we only get to see them in migration, and they're very active, bouncing around. And we again, this ones that of course we all love to see any of them, but Wilson's warbler, cute little guy. And then I promised those gray hooded warblers, the ones down in the low grass or along the ground. There's two that are pretty prized birds for a lot of people. This is the morning warbler, and not the time of day. It's more the black band right here on their just below the gray hood. It's looks like people thought it looked like a morning band. And somebody they're sad or morning one, but they show that they're completely gray hooded with that black in the eye, yellow body, but that black band across his chest. And they're very vocal, but they're usually down in wet grass, like in the forest, down near a creek, and there's tall grass all around. That's a great place to look for them. Like a beautiful, beautiful bird. And I love now we're getting into the late warblers, the ones who come through later. The morning warbler is classically a late migrant bird, along with this cousin. They're called the Operonus warblers. Is this bird? I call it the prize warbler. I know people who have 600 plus life birds that don't have a Connecticut warbler on their life list because they are that secretive. They are, they'll be blasting the song out, and they'll be in vegetation 15 feet from you, and you can't find them because they're skulking around on the ground, walking around, and usually mostly time in creek bottoms and low areas. I've had friends sit on a park bench one spring, and we came up and saw him there, and he heard the Connecticut warbler. I said, "Oh, Connecticut warbler." He said, "It's been calling for an hour. I ain't caught a glimpse of it." He said, "I've been sitting there waiting on it, and then waiting for it to walk out or hop up." So Connecticut warblers are absolutely stunning birds, and they have that gray hood. They don't have that dark morning band like its cousin, but they do have that bold eye ring. So, and they're a good sized warbler. Again, late warblers. We know that migration is tailing off whenever we see and hear the Connecticut morning warblers. And what's considered, this one it's kind of late, but mid to late, the Chestnut-sided Warbler, which has that yellow cap on top. Very striking birds. And these birds like secondary growth. These birds actually increased in numbers with logging because they like young growth of forest, young trees versus old mature trees. So whenever there was a lot of logging going on in this country, we saw this increase in chestnut-sided warbler population. So another really beautiful one, absolutely, unmistakable when you learn the patterns and you see it. It just stands out like so many different warblers do. You don't confuse them with anything. But the chestnut-sided warbler, great middle bird. And then the northern water thrush. Now we talked about the Louisiana water thrush at first. Remember, I told you they prefer streams and creeks, moving water, and they're here very, very early. Well, northern water thrushes come here through the mid to late migration, and they like still water, but they prefer to be like kind of almost in stagnant water areas. But you do have to listen to the song. It's the best way to separate them. But if you get really good photos, like if you have the ability to do that, you can see that throat. And the amount of striping on the throat can separate them out. And the color, they say, oh, one's more buff colored and one's more white colored. Boy, just too much overlap. You can't rely on that. But listen for the song because that's what's going to really tell you what they are. And like I said, the Louisiana water thrushes are usually singing a lot from early on. And then they're actually toning down on song whenever the northern water thrushes come through. So, again, it's a warbler, just doesn't have the name. Oh, this is a tragic story of two cousins. On the left is the blue-winged warbler, which a friend of mine texted me that he had one today singing in the south part of Kansas City at an area. And the other one is the golden-winged warbler, which is, again, one of my favorites. Beautiful birds, but they are closely related. And they sound alike, bee buzz of the blue wing and bee buzz 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 of the golden wing. The problem is they're interbreeding. The blue wing is a much more dominant bird, and it tends to mate with golden wing warblers. And there's the fear, and there's a lot of studies going on that they're actually breeding the golden wing warbler out of existence. So it's a sad story, and habitat has a lot to do with it. They're crossing over more than they ever have because of a lot of cutting. But the blue wing warbler and the golden wing warbler, two great birds to see and to look for. And you guys out east probably have the overlap zone for them, and their nesting is a lot out there in that Ohio, West Virginia area out there, Pennsylvania. I know we had them on both of them on our nature center in Pittsburgh in migration quite commonly, and probably nesting too. So two gorgeous warblers. And then the chickadee warbler, I call it, the blackpoll warbler, which this blackpoll warbler is truly significant of the end of migration. Two things go on in spring migration that bird watchers watch for. One is when we start seeing a lot of blackpoll warblers, and they do very much look like chickadees. You see the white face and the black cap and throat area, but they also have pink legs, which is very great because you usually see these guys high up in trees, and seeing those pink legs from underneath can help identify it. They're very ticky birds, ticky, 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 very ticky, ticky. And they're about out of my audible range anymore. Now, with my hearing aids in and I'm right under them, I can hear them. But boy, they have a really, really high pitched song, and they come through at the very end of migration. The other part, blackpolls and also female warblers. The female warblers migrate later than the males, and so when we start seeing a lot of female warblers, we know that the warbler migration is winding down, and the warbler migration is parallels with tanagers and grosbeaks and everything else. So when you're a bird watcher, warblers are that important to you. You gauge the rest of migration kind of by where those warblers are coming through. And then the not really a warbler. The yellow-breasted chat is so unique. Yet they didn't know where to classify this bird for many, many years, so they put it in the warblers. But and so a lot of people with older field guides, and when they learned warblers a long time ago, they included yellow-breasted chat. It is not a warbler, but it kind of acts like them, and it sounds like a catbird. It makes all kind of sounds, clicks and clacks and buzzes and things like that. Actually entertaining, and it's large. It'd be the largest warbler if it were a warbler, but that's a bird that fools people. And if like I said, depending upon the age of your field guide, it may still have them within the warbler family. And then, guys, I don't have time, like I said, do any of the Western warblers. We'll do a program on those, I promise, in the future. But this is my favorite warbler of all, the red-faced warbler, which is to the southwestern U.S. and I've seen them in canyons and mountains in Arizona. I absolutely love them, red-faced warbler. So that's a teaser for the Western warbler program that we will definitely do in the future. Okay, now, this is a chart that I did many years ago for basically this PowerPoint that I just did for you. This is the Eastern wood warbler migration through our area, and I've got the habitat. I've got how frequent they are, something that can help you the key in on the identification. Whether they nest here or not, and I got it color coded. But remember, this is for Kansas City, so this will apply to a lot of you. But we're going to put a link to this on in the description below. Have a wonderful time spring migration. Get out there every day that you can over the next 2 to 3 weeks, because I'm telling you, every day brings in something new. So put yourself in forest, on field edges, and prairies if you can. Ponds. Water is so key to these birds in migration. So I really like to bird watch along rivers and streams and during spring migration. I like to start high up on hills in the early morning because birds are falling out after night migration. So a lot of times there's birds high up in the morning, and they disperse out into the forest and then down into the lower reaches later in the day. Until next time, let's talk birds.